Senator Bob Casey, I'm so deeply appreciative of your time this morning. There is so much swirling in our national conscience right now, and I'd like to begin with two issues of justice that are vitally important to my community. You've been outspoken in calling for structural changes to dispute systemic racism, including changes to some common policing tactics. I'm curious to know more about what you're looking to do and how you think you and the Senate might move the needle on this ongoing outrage.
Well, Rabbi, thank you, and it's great to be with you. And I appreciate this opportunity to discuss issues that I think are weighing on the minds of a lot of Americans. And I think the issue broadly of criminal justice reform, but also specifically the police misconduct part of that, is an issue that is finally, I think, uh, gaining some momentum. I'll start with myself. I think I'm like a lot of Americans, but I hope I'm like a lot of public officials. That's, to use an old expression, is examining my conscience, asking myself, have you done enough as a United States Senator, as a legislator who can focus on issues, bring forward legislation, support legislation, move the agenda forward for accountability in our policing, but also more broadly, criminal justice reform? And I think, unfortunately for me, the answer is no, I haven't done enough. And I'm trying to catch up or make up for that by some of the actions we're going to be taking over the next days, weeks, and months. And unfortunately, it'll take years for some of it. But so I start with that admission. But I think it's a feeling that a lot of Americans, or a sense that a lot of Americans have, that we all have to do more, because changing laws is a big part of this. But as we all know, and we've often said, changing hearts is also part of this. So, what do you do if you're a legislator? Well, you got to try to support or develop and try to get support for legislation. We start, I think, with, and this is, I'm not sure people fully understand how significant the Justice and Policing Act is in terms of not just the scope of it, the reach of it, but also the degree of support it has that even a few years ago probably wouldn't have had the anywhere near the support it has now, albeit so far from one party. But I'll get to that in a moment. But there are a couple of things we can do. Number one is we can change, because we're federal legislators, we can change federal law to make sure federal policing and issues that involve police misconduct at a federal level are greatly reformed or improved. But part of this as well is to give citizens more power. There's a federal statute. It's 18 United States Code, Section 242, and that's where the bill starts, to change a standard so that when there's an investigation of police misconduct, that you don't have the highest standard of willfulness, which is very, very hard to prove. This bill would lower that standard to a knowingly or with reckless disregard, a lower standard, but still a tough standard. And that is one thing I know that people have been waiting for a long time. Also, this whole idea of qualified immunity, where in large measure law enforcement has been walled off or insulated from accountability, especially when a citizen, brings an action for a violation of their rights. It's a constitutional action they bring. This bill will modify that part of our federal law, Section 1983, to enable individuals to actually recover damages when police violate constitutional rights. That it would be to use another old expression, a sea change. We want to strengthen pattern and practice investigations by the Department of Justice. One of the two things that are a problem there. Number one is you have an administration who does not bring those actions, where the Justice Department does a specific investigation of a pattern and practice of discrimination or misconduct in a police department um, across the country. The problem with that right now is the Trump administration hasn't brought any. The Obama administration, I think, had 20 or more of these investigations. So Number one is we have to use that tool with a different president and a different Justice Department. But we should also make sure, no matter who is president, no matter who is at DOJ, that you can have subpoena power to give the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department that power that they need to extract information while they're doing an investigation. Because we all know that you can be a great investigator, but if you can't get all the facts that sometimes only subpoena power can yield, it's not going to be worth much. So that's just three. I could go down a longer list, but I don't want to keep rambling on. But interestingly, though, um, when it gets through a series of changes that involve probably three words: accountability, transparency, and training. It also very specifically says that there will be a ban on chokeholds, there'll be a ban on racial or religious profiling, and there'll be other bans as well to force a kind of discipline or accountability that is not in our system now.
The progressive religious community, and hopefully all of the religious community, is going to do our part by ensuring that the moral outrage we feel is sustained. And I'm so grateful that you and your colleagues are doing so much, are looking at ways to allow this tragic murder or murders to truly move the needle. Thank you for helping to advance these legislative priorities.
Well, I just add to that that there's no question that we're going to need a lot of help to pass this. And faith communities can play a substantial, potentially decisive role. And you know from our history, um, Martin Luther King was obviously a leader in a faith community, but a lot of faith communities came together in the late 50s, but mostly in the 60s, to demand the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And I think we can have a similar moment here where faith leaders and people of faith can often be more persuasive. I want to hate to admit it, but more effective than even legislators at moving public opinion. So I want to thank you for that help.
We are in this together. You mentioned that criminal justice reform is integrally tied to this as well, as I would argue is gun violence prevention, which is another major issue for our community, born of both recent events as well as religious obligation. And I know it's important to you as well. And I'm curious what the Senate can do, what you think you'll be able to do to continue the work of ending gun violence.
Yeah, it's one of those efforts that have escaped us, or successful efforts that have escaped us, because we've had a series of bills that have been introduced over the last number of years, at least the last several years, and they get a lot of or almost overwhelming support on the Democratic side in the Senate, only to die in committee or never get a vote. So that's the legislative challenge. But I think part of what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is to try to introduce a series of measures that covers the gamut of gun violence challenges that we have. And just like in the context of criminal justice and policing, it won't be good enough for us to have police accountability and to try to tear out by the roots the systemic racism that's in our criminal justice system, just as it is in society at large. Because we still have to make sure that African Americans and communities of color have other supports that are every bit as racist or debilitating as police misconduct or other problems. We've got to focus on investments and strategies that will work in housing, in education, in healthcare, in the environment. And one of those, of course, is doing everything we can to reduce gun violence, because we know that communities of color suffer disproportionately. The likelihood of an African American child hearing gunfire on a regular basis in many of our cities, that likelihood is much higher than a child who lives in my neighborhood or the neighborhood I grew up in Scranton. I don't think I ever heard gunfire once growing up. I'm not sure I've heard gunfire in my adult life in my neighborhood or in my community. For a lot of folks in low-income communities, that's a regular occurrence. So what do we do? Well, a couple of things we should do. We should continue to pass or to continue to try to pass measures like background checks, which have broad bipartisan support. Maybe as high as 90% of the American people support it, except one party is resistant to substantial progress on background checks. But it's whether it's background checks or ban on the military-style assault weapons, or whether it's trying to take other steps that we need to take guns out of the hands of folks who should not have them, who pose a danger to themselves or to others. We have to continue to do that. But along the way, we have to continue to make this priority, the priority of reducing gun violence, part of a broader strategy to improve the life of so many Americans who frankly get a lot of lip service from people in both parties and never seem to have or never seem to be the beneficiaries of a determined, specific, enduring strategy to lift up their lives. And you can't do that very well if you can't achieve that if you're not working on reducing gun violence.
Thank you. There are so many different issues taking place in our world today, and I wish I had a half a day of your time to be able to not only thank you for some of the work you're doing, but to lobby on other efforts. If I could turn our focus just one more time to a letter you recently wrote, shifting to foreign policy. I'm grateful for that June 3rd letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and potential future Prime Minister Benny Gantz, urging them to cease and desist from unilateral annexation of the West Bank. I fear, like you, I suspect you do, that such a move would be the end of the two-state solution to hostilities as we know it and push peaceful resolution past a point of no return. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your thinking, perhaps the impetus to the letter. With so much going on, why was that a focus of your time?
Well, thank you for the question because it's a very important issue. And even in the midst of these almost like a triple crisis for the country, the COVID-19 public health crisis, the jobs crisis or economic crisis that flows in its wake, and then a series of criminal justice challenges we have to make sure that we don't fail to pay attention to important foreign policy issues. I wrote the letter because I think it's important that in a relationship like this between our country and Israel, two nations, but actually two peoples who have a long and I would argue unshakable, unbreakable bond. I think it's important that we be honest about differences. And I think someone like me, who I've spent a good deal of time in the Middle East over the years, many years, going back a number of years when I was on the Foreign Relations Committee, I was the chairman of a subcommittee that had all of the Middle East, all of South and Central Asia. So a subcommittee that had way too many countries in it. But I spent a lot of time, obviously, on Middle East issues. And I had the privilege, really the honor as an American official, to be able to visit Israel a number of times. I guess I might be up to 5 now since I've been in the Senate. And I've also had the privilege and the honor to sit with Prime Minister Netanyahu, not necessarily to get to know him well. I can't say I know him well. But by the way, I tried to remind him every time I spoke to him 4 or 5 times over the years that he spent a lot of time in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania as a high school student. But I wrote the letter because I'm concerned, as you just articulated, that this unilateral action could destroy, if not at least undermine badly, the effort at a two-state solution, 2 states for 2 people that has to be grounded in the security of Israel, as well as a pluralistic and democratic Israel as well. And I worry that would be undermined, as well as just the broader security of Israel. It's always a challenge, and that's why our support in the United States, I don't think we'll ever fail to support Israel with our dollars and our commitment. But this could make it more difficult. It would also, I think, embolden those who have been out to destroy Israel or take it down over many generations. We have I think, a strong international consensus supporting a two-state solution, and I worry that this action could undermine that. Last thing I'll say is that I tried to write this letter with a degree of humility, knowing that Prime Minister Netanyahu and Mr. Gantz, they've been at this a while. They've got a lot of experience. And some might say, well, you're an American official. You shouldn't be telling them what to do about their what's in the best interest of their country. But I think the relationship is such that we've always worked pretty well together. We always try to move in the same direction. It's a relationship like no other. And so I tried to not be as certain about outcomes. But I strongly believe that this would be the wrong decision. And finally, I'm fortified in that determination that I made by a whole host. I don't even know the number, but it's probably a few hundred Israeli security officials, those who spent their lives in the defense of Israel, the security of Israel, and I place heavy reliance upon those who have spent all that experience focused on the security of Israel. So a lot of folks in Pennsylvania, in the Jewish community, came to me and said, we hope that you would speak out about this. Others said, I don't want to get into it, and we hope that you'll just kind of step back from it. And I could have done that, or I could have written a letter and not made it public, but I think it warranted the kind of not just seriousness of purpose, but putting it on the record. I think it's an issue that warrants that kind of serious attention. So I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope that we can continue to work with all of our friends in Israel for a two-state solution, elusive and as difficult as that has been for the Israeli people.
I appreciate your leadership on this issue. For me and for my community, a secure, democratic, and Jewish state of Israel is of vital importance. And I think the United States has an integral role to play in supporting, encouraging, occasionally challenging missteps that would undermine or not uphold all three of those at the same time. I'm grateful for your leadership. Senator, I'm grateful for the conversation today. Thank you so much for your time.
Rabbi, thank you.